If you don't have all the information available right away after the speech, you can see the entire version in a nutshell tonight at 7 o'clock in the local regional public TV, MDR TV. There is a broadcasting show. I don't know its actual name, but it's between 7 and 7:30, where they have a report on Ms. Marshall's speech and scientific results. I now have to address the fact that somebody got influenced by the flu. It's Nico Stehr, the director of the European Center for Sustainability Research from the Zeppelin University Friedrichshafen. His talk is going to be held by his colleague, Dr. Amanda Machin. A warm welcome, Ms. Machin. One quote from the synopsis right away, which really, let's say, shocked me in a certain way, and I'm very excited to hear the answers why and how to deal with the fact that is stated in the talk. The quote is, "Modern democracies so far have failed to shrink the gap between knowledge and policy efforts." Well, I hope for two answers. Welcome, Amanda Machin.
Hello. So first of all, I want to communicate Nico Stehr's apologies. He can't be here. He would have loved to have been. I hope I can convey some of the ideas that we've been working on together adequately. The issue that today demands global understanding more than any other is arguably that of climate change. My talk today contains a word of warning. It concerns the struggle to align climate policy with climate science, or put differently, the apparent mismatch between the knowledge of scientists and the institutions of democracy. Many of those concerned by a warming planet are frustrated with democratic government. Modern liberal democracies have so far not only failed to shrink the gap between knowledge and climate policy efforts, but they appear to have actually got in the way. It seems to some that decisions should be taken out of the fumbling hands of the public and the officials they elect and placed in the steadier hands of experts. Others flirt with the idea that a form of authoritarian governance might be more effective in addressing the problem. Al Gore's famous inconvenient truth begins now to imply the complements of an inconvenient democracy. The focus of this talk, then, is with this disenchantment with democracy and the idea that the state, led by experts, ought to be the source of security in the face of extreme danger. Surprisingly, this disenchantment with democracy and the implication that it might need to be suppressed in the light of profound future environmental changes has not received much systematic attention in the social sciences, politics, or the media. We believe it is crucial to bring it into the spotlight. We insist that there is no contradiction between democratic governance and scientific knowledge. Rather than lamenting the inconvenience of democratic governance, the need is to enhance democracy, not despite, but especially in light of the massive challenges of a changing climate. We need to recognise our changing climate as not only an environmental or economic or ethical issue, but as a political issue too. We argue that the proponents of an inconvenient democracy are badly mistaken. What is needed is not less democracy, but more. The robustness of the consensus in the science community about human-caused climate change has not only increased in strength, but a number of current studies point to far more dramatic and long-lasting consequences of global warming than previously thought. Under such exceptional circumstances, many scientists ask, how is it possible that such evidence does not motivate speedy political action and behaviour change in all societies around the world? Why are we waiting, as the title of Nico Stehr's newest book puts it? Despite urgent warnings, the social and political response to climate change remains, even after Paris, wholly inadequate. In the past, warlike conditions and major disasters typically were seen to justify the abolition of democratic rights, if only temporarily. The term exceptional circumstances refers to conditions that are often invoked to grant governments additional powers to avert unforeseen threats. The present appeal to exceptional circumstances echoes this sentiment, demanding the elevation of a single socio-political purpose to ultimate political supremacy. For example, the well-known climate researcher James Hansen summarised the general frustration when he asserts that the democratic process does not work. James Lovelock, another long-time scientific voice of warning, compares climate change to war, emphasising that we need to abandon democracy in order to pull the world out of its state of lethargy. Dale Jameson, too, exemplifies the sceptical view about the obstacles faced by our present political order in coping with the consequences of a changing climate. He warns that global warming presents us with the largest collective action problem that humanity has ever faced. We have not designed political institutions that are conducive to solving them. He adds, sadly, it is not entirely clear that democracy is up to the challenge of climate change. The historian Eric Hobsbawm's long-time scepticism towards democracy extends to strong doubts about the effectiveness of democratic states in solving complex global problems such as climate change. We do not disagree with these important thinkers about the enormities of the challenge, but we do disagree strongly about the implicit remedy that democracy should be put on hold. Can we really sacrifice the achievements of the centuries-old struggle to secure universal suffrage? Is there really a clash between democratic processes and environmental goals? We do not advance a conservative argument for keeping things how they are, but rather a radical argument for enhancing democracy. There is actually nothing new, as David Runciman has documented, about this outburst of disgust with the workings of democracy. Lamenting the failings of democracy is a permanent feature of democratic life, one that persists through government crises and successes alike. In the 1970s, a similar kind of scepticism arose around the question of the limits to growth and the survival of humankind. Scientists warned about the essential slowness and inflexibility of democratic institutions and expressed their preferences for authoritarian solutions. Dennis Meadows, the co-author of the original Limits to Growth, reiterated more recently his strong suspicion about the barriers of the slowness and short-sightedness of democratic governance. The argument about an inconvenient democracy derives its intellectual sustenance from a range of considerations: the limitation of human thought and its orientation towards short-term self-interest, the inability of governments, given constitutional constraints, to attend to long-term goals, the influence of vested interests on the political agendas of the day, the widespread addiction to fossil fuel, the inability of the public and politician to grasp scientific findings. It might seem then that democracy is inherently flawed as a method of tackling environmental problems. Until recently, open and explicit expression of doubt about the virtues of democracy has been rare among intellectuals and politicians, however, most surely in post-war Germany. But today, disenchantment is becoming more vocal as entrenched climate policy regimes, such as the United Nations Framework Convention, fail to live up to their promise, and as one after another international conference on climate change fails to achieve a substantial global reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Leading climate scientists insist that humanity is at a crossroads. A continuation of present economic and political trends leads to disaster, if not a collapse, of human civilization. But then how does one govern well under exceptional circumstances? Should climate science knowledge and climate scientists play a bigger role in political deliberations about climate policy? For the philosopher of science, Evelyn Fox-Keller, there is a compelling case for this. She argues that climate scientists are not only in a position to take the lead, but they are obliged to do so. Robert Stavins, a director of Harvard's Environmental Economics program and an IPCC lead author, notes that it's going to take enlightened leadership, leaders that take the lead. And in a quote that's already been mentioned today, Paul Crutzen, who is widely known as a scientist who coined the term the Anthropocene, states in an article published in Nature, a daunting task lies ahead for scientists and engineers to guide society towards environmentally sustainable management during the era of the Anthropocene. But the idea that science and scientific leadership offer some sort of alternative to democracy has, to put it mildly, major weaknesses. Scientific knowledge cannot dictate what to do. Political decisions involve ethical and economic considerations too. Knowledge about how such decisions are best made is not particularly available to scientists. Indeed, such knowledge is inherently and necessarily contestable. The articulation of a single and simple technical goal, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, cannot automatically illuminate an optimal pathway for transforming the complex global energy system on which modern societies depend. The vision of a scientifically rational and benevolent authoritarian regime is thus incoherent. But as stressed by climate scientist Mike Hume, such notions may be favoured by those who are more likely to conceive of the planet as a machine amenable to control engineering. The pessimistic assessment of the ability of democratic government to cope with and control exceptional circumstances seemed to bring with it an optimistic assessment of the potential of large-scale social planning. Yet all evidence suggests that the capacity of governments and societies to rigorously plan their future is rather limited, perhaps non-existent. The problem is not one of democracy, but of the complexity of social change. The claims that key uncertainties about the behaviour of the natural climate processes have been eliminated does nothing whatsoever to address the uncertainties associated with the social and political processes for taking effective action. Indeed, this is precisely why democracy, inconvenient as it may be, is not only important, but for a challenge of the magnitude and complexity of climate change, essential. To a far greater extent than authoritarian governance, democratic governance is flexible and capable of learning from policy mistakes, which are inevitable when trying to deal with something as complex as climate change. Democratic government's ability to learn allows them, as Runciman explains, to keep experimenting and adapting to the challenge they encounter so that no danger becomes overwhelming. Democracies have the experimental adaptability and they have the collective resilience under duress. Democratic nations have a rich history of getting out of tight spots. But Runciman offers a cautionary note because the knowledge that democracies have their long-term strengths does not tell them how to access those strengths at the right moment. This is why climate change is so dangerous for democracies. An alternative model is therefore needed, and we submit that it will be found only through revitalised democratic interaction in which alternative perspectives can be presented and tested. A wall-like footing has exactly the opposite effect, narrowing the complexity of social and political life to focus on one outcome. Climate policy needs to do the opposite. It must be compatible with democracy, otherwise the threat to civilization will be much more than just changes to our physical environment. The alternative to the abolition of democracy is more democracy, the empowerment and increase of the knowledgeability of individuals, groups and movements who work on environmental issues, and the enhancement and acknowledgement of their exchange. Through the emergence of alternative ideas and perspectives, climate change can be connected to local and regional issues. It can be harnessed to, indeed perhaps even itself strengthen, local and regional capacities to respond to climate change. Examples include the widespread community and regional support of renewable energy in Germany. Broad participation of diverse voices is essential to keeping global warming below a point of no return. Efforts to simplify the global approach to climate change through a single international governance regime have failed in the past and will continue to fail. Now is the time to commit to democratic complexification. I don't know if that's the word, but Nico used it and I kept it in because I like it so much, that fosters creativity and experimentation in the pursuit of multiple desired goals. For those who think that there can be only one global pathway to addressing climate change, the erosion of democracy might seem to be convenient. But history tells us that suppression of social complexity undermines the capacity of societies to solve problems. Perhaps our democratic institutions are failing us in the face of environmental threats today. But this is not because they are too democratic. Rather, it is because they are not democratic enough. Thank you.